Why are you going through my phone? What's your problem?
Why are you insecure?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's how I define gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
I gave my addiction supreme status for 25 years. I've had extramarital affairs with 26 other women. The help that I found was Sex Addicts Anonymous. Like, my wife deserves a husband who is honest and faithful, and my son deserves a dad who's fully present. He just deserves my undivided attention when he needs it. Just freaking being dialed into what actually is going on in any given moment. I am the one accountable for my behavior. She chose to believe in me when she had absolutely no reason to, because I was a lying, sneaky piece of shit our entire marriage. In my experience, you will never figure it out for yourself. The path to making healthy choices is not one you can figure out. You won't find it on your own. You have to call in some other resources. It's a hard path, but you have to do it if you really want to get clean.
If you're a man that controls his own destiny, a man that is always in the pursuit of being better, you are in the right place. You are responsible. You are strong. You are a leader. You are a force for good. Gentlemen, you are the Alpha, and this is the Alpha Quorum.
Welcome back to the Alpha Quorum Show. Brad Singletary here. I'm super excited about a first-time experience we're going to have tonight. Our guest tonight is preferring anonymity. We're doing a series on addiction recovery, and this guest has agreed to share some very detailed and personal information about his life and his story related to addiction and his recovery that is quite personal, as you could imagine. And others have also, shared some of that. But I'm hoping that this is going to allow for some really rich, just disclosure of things related to sexual things of a sexual nature that are kind of hard to talk about. So I'm just going to use the code name Jay. So I want to welcome Jay here today. And so because we're doing the anonymity, I don't really have an intro. What I can say is that this guy is very cool. He's very good looking. He and his significant other have a very successful business, and there's just a lot of cool things about your story. And I just want to jump right into what you would like to share about your life with addiction, life before the recovery process, and what that's been like. And so I'll just kind of steer it a little bit as you go, but really this is you telling your story, Jay. Appreciate you being here. And I know that this is going to be valuable to men who are, and maybe their partners who are listening, in hopes to, just have some perspective about how to do this thing. So why don't we just jump right in, Jay, with you talking about your life, your addiction, the kind of things you might say in a meeting, or whatever you can tell us about how you got to this point and what hasn't worked and what has.
Love to, for sure. Thanks for inviting me in here today, Brad. It's, I appreciate being invited, and there'll be some value, I hope, with this. I think a lot of people struggle, with sex addiction. I have been in a program of recovery since February 21st of 2021. So we're coming up on 3 years, and it took nearly 25 years as an adult, young adult, and then middle-aged adult. And now I'm at the ripe age of 46. So it's been a factor in my life for going on, 25 plus years. It took me that long to realize that I had a major, major problem. And I came clean to my wife in February of 2021. And the very next day, found myself in a Sex Addicts Anonymous meeting, not for the first time. I had dipped my toes in the water of SAA back in 2013, after one of the many times being caught acting out by my wife, and was in the program for about 4 or 5 months. And we both got promoted at work. We relocated to an area where that program wasn't really available. So I kind of just, gave up on it. And wasn't long after that I found myself right back into the depraved behavior that I'd been to my whole life. So it's evolved over the years. But basically, I'm coming up on, again, like I said, 3 years of sobriety. And then it has not come easy. Has not all been rainbows and unicorns. And I owe a lot of what I'll define as success in being sober and staying clean to the fact that I'm one of the very lucky individuals who suffer from this affliction, whose life didn't completely explode when they decided to come clean and get clean. I see my fellow brothers and sisters in recovery every week when I go to meetings, sometimes multiple times a week. And there are meetings every day, almost anywhere you want to go. To the beauty of technology now is you can jump onto Zoom meetings no matter where you live. There are major markets, mostly driving out of major cities, where you can jump onto a meeting if you need help pretty much anytime. But I hear stories and share stories in recovery all the time where it's just absolutely heartbreaking, because sex addiction, no matter what behaviors somebody is into, and there's dozens of different paths that this addiction and forms that it can take, this disease, and I firmly believe, and I've come to believe that it is a disease, this destroys people's lives, not just the lives of those who are the sex addict themselves. It destroys families. It destroys careers. And people die from this stuff. People end up in jail. People you would never expect, people you see on the street, or maybe you work with them or know them from, the golf course, or somebody it could be your brother or your sister. You would never guess. And people with this affliction lead complete double lives, myself included. And fortunately for me, I got to a breaking point in February, almost 3 years ago, 2021, where I had just had enough. I spent most of my time when I wasn't, we call it acting out. Mm-hmm. That's engaging in what we call inner circle behaviors. For me, it was sexting. It was using social media to, have cyber sex with women. It was acting out with women that I worked with. Over the course of my marriage, 13 years to my wife, I've had extramarital affairs with 26 other women. Wow. So having said all that, it's abstaining from those kind of behaviors, but the lying, the cheating, the covering of your tracks, the manipulation, the gaslighting to protect your behavior and make it fit no matter where you live or what job you have or who you're married to, always finding a way to mold and shape your life so that your addiction will fit. For me, I just had a moment after getting caught. My wife discovered a message on social media on my phone. Literally, it was a Sunday night. I remember I had taken the trash out and left my cell phone on the kitchen counter, which this is a careless mistake. I knew better at the time than to do that, because I hid my phone all the time. I even had a case on my phone that closed, like a wallet. Oh, right. So the cover. So that if, and of course I had all my notifications turned off on my phone. So if a text or a message came in, it would never just on the screen, it wouldn't just pop up. So you had to kind of dig to look into it. I was on the kitchen counter one night, and in the 30 seconds I was outside taking out the trash, my wife picked up my phone, found a message on social media that wasn't even, it wasn't appropriate, but it wasn't even like on a scale of 1 to 10 of what she could have found, it was like a 2. And in the past, I always think about the Grinch. Okay. I would have thought up a lie and thought it up quick. And that got me out of hot water more times than I can tell you. But I share that because I got to a point that later that night and the next morning, I I just completely broke. I had decided that no matter what the outcome was going to be, I was going to begin to share with my wife exactly what my life had been like and the entire time she knew me. I don't think all of it came as a tremendous shock to her because she's caught me numerous times and, I've always talked my way out of it and convinced her that it was a one-time thing and it wasn't a big deal. And I could write novels about that, but I got to the point where I was just freaking exhausted. I was just done. The amount of time, effort, and resources I had to dedicate to concealing my behavior on top of the behavior itself, the amount of energy that took out of me over the 20 plus years I had been into it, I just hit a wall. And I realized it was time that if I had any hope of saving my marriage at that point, it was time to start coming clean and to get help. And the help that I found, fortunately, was in the form of Sex Addicts Anonymous. There's a strong presence where I live. They have meetings 7 days a week, and I found one the next day. It was at a very inconvenient time, but I didn't care. It was in the worst possible part of town I could have driven to. Didn't care. Didn't matter. I knew at that point I was taking the first step on a path that I didn't know where it was going to lead me. If you look at the data and the stats behind this, I don't know what the numbers are. It's a very, very high percentage of people who are admitted sex addicts. They just cannot stay sober. Whatever it is that they're into, whatever trauma led them to, that kind of behavior, whatever the source was, whatever is pulling them down that path, they just cannot keep it together. And it's heartbreaking. I hear stories every day. We hand out, just like AA or Gamblers Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, we hand out chips, and the SAA program, for those who don't know, is founded on the principles of AA. Mm-hmm. It's very, very similar in terms of the 12 steps. Mm-hmm. The meetings are structured very similarly. Each one's got a different flavor to it. There's no cross-talking involved in meetings for the most part. And if you go and you pay attention, you will quickly realize that you are not alone and you've got support of your brothers and sisters in recovery. But the rate of people who relapse, dive back into their behaviors in certain levels is it's staggering.
Pretty high. I'm guessing that some of that has to do with just the biological drive. I mean, we don't have things pumping through our body making us want to drink. If you've got a year sober or whatever, there's nothing really that's pushing that. But with sexuality, especially for males, there's a biological drive toward sexual release, and that acting out process, I'm guessing, is fueled many times by that, in addition to all the other habitual things that go along with that, or trauma you mentioned.
Yeah, everyone's different for sure. Everyone's got different triggers, and the purpose that the acting out serves is different for everybody. I think for many people, there's a chemical component. It's physiological. There is a biological force that's pulling you down the path. That's for me, in the work that I've done in the last 3 years, both in recovery, with my sponsor, 3 different therapists. I've seen a marriage counselor, for quite some time. I've been very lucky that I found a professional therapist who specializes in sex addiction. Mm-hmm. She treats people that are in prison. She treats people she's very, very well versed in the 12 steps of SAA, and she's been an incredible resource. So it has not been without an overwhelming amount of help. Mm-hmm. That I have been fortunate enough to find myself coming up on 3 years of sobriety. And I'll be the first one to admit, I am not somebody that has attacked the 12 steps with a vengeance. Some guys or people get in those meetings and they're like, oh, it's only 12 steps. I'll be done in 2 weeks. And
we'll knock this out on Saturday.
I can hammer this out in one day. No problem. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
Everyone's journey through the recovery program is unique. There's some very common principles, that you'll find in the 12 steps of SAA. Like I said, you'll find them in AA. It's about, admitting you have no control over this and your life's unmanageable. Step one's admitting you have a problem. And then realizing you can't fix it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's all about, taking a moral inventory and, identifying your character defects and character assets at the same time. Mm-hmm. Making amends to those that you can. Very similar to AA. The difference between SAA and AA is there's not a clear-cut definition of abstinence. And in every meeting, they read a statement called the abstinence statement, which is it's maybe the most important part of the preamble stuff of the meeting that they read, because, if you go to AA, you're abstaining from drinking. If you go to Narcotics Anonymous, you just don't do drugs. You just can't stop having sex or being a sexual being. It's, as I said, a biological force or human nature. So you have to go through and identify, and it takes time to do this for each individual person and for yourself, what is considered acting out and what is not, what is healthy and what is not. For a lot of guys, pornography is at the top of the list. Like pornography, they just can't watch porn. It's not on my list. It was never a big deal for me. I mean, I don't really enjoy watching porn that much. I mean, I think everyone watches porn, but for me, it does not trigger me to go act out
worse.
And that's not like what kicks the tires and lights the fires for me. I've got plenty of triggers, but for example, pornography was not one. So that's just an example. So that's where it diverges from those who might be familiar with AA or
it's
something
not so
like
much
that.
of an all or nothing like alcohol, just you don't drink. With this one, it's finding your own like baseline of healthy behavior. And
correct. And a lot of it's really easy. For me, it was, okay, inner circle. Don't sleep with other women. Don't do that. Cyber sex, sexting online with, through text messages and stuff like that. But then as I dug deeper, it's lying, it's manipulating, it's, gaslighting, which I define as, somebody, calls you on something or calls you on the carpet and you immediately flip it around and make it seem like it's their fault, not yours.
Like their perception of reality is wrong, not you. Correct.
Like if my wife would find a text on my phone, and be like, what is this? And my response would, if it had been, well, why are you going through my phone? What's your problem?
Why are you insecure?
Correct.
Yeah.
That's how I define gaslighting. And there's no faster way to piss my wife off even now, than if I do that. So I'm hyper aware of it. But no, it's the biggest one for me is if you get past the granular, like here's the specific things that, hey, I just can't freaking do X, Y, and Z. I mean, that's pretty basic. It's things like keeping secrets, embellishing when you tell stories, filling in the gaps to stories when you start telling them, making up the parts you don't know. And then really it's I gave my addiction supreme status in my life for 25 years.
Oh.
There was nothing I didn't put in front of it. Like to behave the way that, speaking for myself, that I did for all those years, psychologically, I had to be prepared to lose everything that I cared about. Multiple different careers were jeopardized, relationships, time with my family. Just being mentally present. That's been one of the biggest changes for me in the last 3 years is, man, imagine being at things like being at a movie or watching a game on TV, but your mind is completely somewhere else. Only it's not a game on TV. It's your wedding.
Oh, wow.
It's, your kid's high school graduation. Like you're physically there, but your head's in the clouds. You're worried about what's going on your phone right now, or your mind just wanders. So, that was one of the biggest changes for me when I, began to live a sober lifestyle, was just freaking being dialed into what actually is going on in any given moment.
Rather than your obsession with sex or relationships.
Oh my gosh. I mean,
or covering up, like concealment.
I don't know how I lasted as long as I did, quite frankly. And I had moments where I would get caught by, I could tell you stories. I mean, my wife caught me numerous times before I even met my wife, previous girlfriends, this whole thing is, I blame technology for all of it. Quite frankly, this is not my fault. I'm kidding. If I never had a cell phone or a computer, this wouldn't have been a problem. But no, those were the tools, right? So, and that's very common. We live in a day and age now where it don't matter what you're into, single, married, divorced, like healthy or unhealthy, it's in the palm of your hand at all times. Yeah. You can get to it whenever you want to. So I don't know what people who were sex addicts back in the 70s went through, but it must have been pretty boring. But I joke, but it's just, everything has always for me been like right there if I wanted it.
I'm curious about the beginnings of your, just sexual behavior. I mean, is this like, where did this begin for you? Was there anything unusual about your sexual development as a, teenager or preteen or any of that stuff?
Absolutely. Unlike many of my fellow members of my recovery program, I was not sexually abused as a child. That's a very common thing for a lot of people who end up in recovery programs or end up as bona fide sex addicts. They were sexually abused at some point in their life. I did grow up in an abusive household. My parents were both in the military. My parents divorced when I was 14. I have a phenomenal father who, to this day, him and I are extremely close, kind, patient, understanding, everything you would want from your dad. Our mother, different story. We love my mom, but she is an unstable human being. She would be loving and tender one minute and a maniac the next. She was physically and emotionally abusive to both my sister and I growing up. That was intensified by the divorce, which when I was 13, my sister was, I think, 15. So we were, at that point, either middle school or high school aged. And that we grew up afraid of my mom. That's what it came down to. So I learned at one of the biggest things I look at is a very, very early age. I learned that lying sometimes kept me out of trouble. My mom's most famous saying growing up was, whenever we were in trouble, was, "Tell me the truth. If you tell me the truth, I might be upset, but if you lie and then I find out, and I will find out, it'll be way worse." Well, pardon my language, but that was bullshit. Because we got our ass beat either way.
Either way.
So at a very young age, I found a way. I learned that sometimes not telling the truth, you didn't always get away with it, but the outcome was the same either way. But sometimes I would lie to keep myself out of trouble, and it worked. So that's the sex addiction. For me, that's important to note. And the first step in the SAA program is you write a complete, as far as you can think back, you write a complete sexual history of your life. And it may be even before you had sex for the first time, you go back into your childhood and you identify moments that you believe planted the seeds where it led to later in life what you turned into. And for me, that was one of the first noteworthy things. That and the fact that we moved a lot when I was a kid, just because of my parents are both in the military. They're both officers in the military.
Wow.
So we moved a ton and we made new friends a lot, but I was also alone quite a bit. My sister was a few years older, like I said, but I would find ways. Well, I think a lot of kids do. You isolate. You play with Transformers and basketball in your room and Star Wars and shit like that. But you find a way to entertain yourself. Mm-hmm. And it was never a sexual thing for me, but I was very comfortable, even as a child. I didn't necessarily need friends to play with all the time. I was okay hanging out alone, watching a movie or watching a game or, playing action figures or whatever. I enjoyed hanging out with my friends. Later in life, I think I had a pretty normal experience, middle school, high school, back in the late 80s and 90s, we didn't have cell phones. So you still passed notes and shit in school. One of the earliest experiences of note for me is if we have time, I have a quick anecdote. So my junior year of high school, my favorite class was Spanish. Not because I loved Spanish. A girl sat behind me who was a senior and she was new. And she was smoking hot, didn't have a lot of friends, didn't really know anybody. And
she didn't, or you didn't?
She didn't.
Okay.
She was new. I had friends and I played sports and I wasn't like Mr. Popular. I wasn't the homecoming king, but I was just a normal kid. Like I had plenty of friends. I had social life, whatever. So her and I I don't know who started. I think she did. Over the course of that year began like just passing notes back and forth to each other. And it was the usual shit. It was like, hey, what's up? Da, 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 da. Like you'd write back and hope you don't get caught. Over the course of that year, those notes being passed back and forth became sexually charged. Just salacious. I mean, like before long, we didn't actually even talk a whole lot, like face to face, like a normal human being would do to each other. It was just these notes, and the secrecy of it was a big part of the attraction. And things you would probably not say out loud to a person, like to their face with eye contact, I had no problem putting them in a note. Right. And then the teacher would walk by and we'd make sure we didn't pass at that point. So, but these notes became sexually charged. And, I had never at that point, I was still a virgin at that point. Later, toward the end of the school year, we had 2 different encounters where we got together. And both times we would start making out and then something would happen. Like both times were at my house, and I had a strict no girls allowed in your room at any time policy. That was my dad's only rule. He's like, I don't want any girls in here, which I get. Well, both of the times I thought we were going to get caught. So I was anxious the entire time, and we're like making out, and then we heard something outside and it was like, oh shit. And both times it kind of fizzled, and hey, next time for sure. She left. We didn't want to get caught. We didn't want to get in trouble. So like little kids, like we were at 17 and 18 at that point. So not really little kids anymore. But I remember both times that it didn't pan out. Like you would think after all that freaking buildup, here I am, 17 years old, like full of hormones, testosterone. Let's like this girl's smoking hot. Let's freaking go. I remember both times that she left. The feeling I had was not frustration. It was not like, damn it. Like it was an overwhelming sense of relief.
Wow.
So in a way, I guess that makes sense. And I'm not ashamed by that. That's how I felt at the time, honestly. I liked being close to getting in trouble, but not actually getting in trouble. So I realized now that at that point in my life, it was about really, let's find out where the edge is and see how close I can get to it without actually doing anything. And then make sure that I get back to safety real fast. So that's an anecdote that I think is important, because I think a lot of other 17-year-old guys in my position probably wouldn't have had the same reaction. I don't know. but I always felt like that was a little bit weird. Like, what's wrong with me? Like that, like, so what if you get in trouble? Like what's going to happen? Like, big freaking deal. So the fact that I so easily was able to get out of those encounters and not really get pissed. I mean, I at that point I'd made out with girls, but I didn't actually have like actual sex until I got to college.
Mm-hmm.
And like I had hookups with girls at parties in college and the girls on my floor in my dorm. Like, yeah, I mean, we all do that, or a lot of people do that. But my first actual experience having like intercourse was after my first year of college. I'd come back for the summer to work just to make money for school. And I'd live at home for a few months. And I wound up dating a girl from work who was about 8 years older than me. So at the time I was 19, I think she was 27, 28. So, I mean, forget there was a 8 or 9 year age difference. Like people who are 29, people who are 19, they're at different parts of their lives. Sure. I mean, there's a whole different
big difference.
Yeah. Dynamic, which of course at the time I didn't give a shit. I was a 19-year-old kid home for the summer and whatever. So, this girl and I, end up dating, hooking up. I lose my virginity to this girl. And it turns out, she lied about being on birth control. So within about 3 to 4 weeks, since we began to date even, she was pregnant.
Wow.
And that was my first experience, like actually having intercourse. So the one thing you're afraid of the most, one thing all your friends warn you about, when you're a teenager, it's like, oh shit. Well, 1 for 1. It's like, so, we decided at that point to, we were going to have the child. I transferred colleges, came back home. And this girl who was the mother of is the mother of my son, had a lot of the same character traits that my mother did, believe it or not.
Imagine that.
Yeah. A lot of my way or the highway. We were not meant to be together. And I came home, did the right thing. Like I said, I transferred colleges. I'd worked multiple jobs to put myself through school. My son was born. We lived together and made it work for his sake for about 4 years. And it was just miserable. I mean, so I again learned, I think at that point, still at a young age, I'm 20, 21, like early 20s, still finishing up school. Whereas part of me wanted to do the right thing. There was some blueprints laid during that time in my life. Just, you know what, just freaking take care of number one, dude. Like I'll put up with a lot, like screaming and yelling and fighting every day with the person you're supposed to be raising a child with. Like, so toward the end of my senior year of college, I was getting my degree. One of my graduation gifts was a brand new iMac.
Oh, wow.
And it was my first personal computer that I had in my house. And the internet was at that point kind of just becoming a thing. It was like 1999, 2000 timeframe. So nobody had iPhones yet. No one had cell phones. I mean, a few people had cell phones, but they weren't like what they are now. Dating myself, sorry. Right. And you grab the America Online DVD-ROM or whatever the frick it was from the mailbox. And next thing you know, you've got AOL and you've got email and you can go on the internet. And I, began to watch porn a little bit more, even though it was slow because, it's dial up. It's, year 2000. Nobody had, freaking Cox high speed at that point.
Takes 2 minutes to download one picture.
Yeah. But I found that, I found myself spending more and more time between classes, after class, between shifts at work, when I had time on my own, even when my son was home. My son was at that time 3-4 years old. I'd turn a movie on for him and he'd be totally cool. And, I'd hop on AOL and I'd get into, there were chat rooms about weather and chat rooms about politics and chat rooms about sports. And then there was chat rooms for people in their 20s and their 30s and their 40s. Well, I found my way into the chat rooms. And then before long, it was chat rooms and AOL Instant Messenger. So that's when the actual behavior started. And because I was with somebody, living with somebody, and we didn't have a great thing going on. But I had skin in the game. I had a young child. We lived there together. We had a life set up. I had to conceal the behavior. So that's the first part of my life that I can remember that's where it all began. Was in the frickin' AOL chat rooms. And then over the years, as technology got better and better and it became easier and easier, I mean, that's kind of just took off from there. But it was definitely, as I see it, very similar to when I was a kid. When my mother would be in one of her moods, she'd be all pissed off, or maybe she wasn't even mad at me. She'd be mad at my sister or whatever. I'd go into my room and close the door and escape. And I'd play basketball, or I'd take out Transformers or whatever. It was an escape. And being in an absolutely miserable relationship, where you're given ultimatums every day. If you don't like it, this is my house, get the hell out. So you're around that long enough. I think anybody would look for a way to check out from that. Right. So for me, my way to check out was to dive into the stuff on the computer, which I knew I had to conceal. So again, it was the dynamic of, let's not just escape. Let's get into something a little bit dangerous. Because now I was escaping, but it was fun. It was also like, you're playing with fire a little bit.
Right.
And again, much like the note being passed back and forth in Spanish class, it was, the secrecy was part of the attraction, even though it gave me tremendous freaking anxiety, because I knew if I got caught, there'd be consequences for sure. Like what's going to blow up? Like this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. So that's kind of where it all began. And then over time, as like I said, I moved out when my son was about 5. Was in and out of relationships, like dating. I met plenty of women that I met in chat rooms online, instant messenger. Which I look at the way things have evolved here in 2023, and that's the way it's done now. I mean, no one meets in the grocery store anymore. It's like
it's all an app or some kind of
Which app are you on? How many IG profiles do you have?
Right.
Like secret cell phones, like shit like that. So, for me, it was I really did that's the double life. That's when it was really beginning to grow up. Because I would date somebody off that I met off the internet, but I'd also be talking to 3 other women at the same time, and having to bob and weave and dance around with what I would call at this point, low stakes relationships. Like I wasn't living with these women. It wasn't like we were like dating seriously. Like we were just, and I was still, in my mid 20s at this point, I'm still a kid. So figuring it out as I go, not realizing that what I was really doing was just reinforcing a behavior that over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years of my life would become increasingly dangerous with the impact it would have not only on myself, but as I got older and got into more meaningful relationships, it began to affect other people. The
impact is bigger and broader.
It continued to grow, and it spilled over into different careers I was in, and had a definite impact on my life professionally. And of course, at the time, I didn't realize any of this, but I was continuing to reinforce and build and make this behavior just absolutely positively part of my DNA every day. And it had gotten to the point very early on where this is what I did for fun. Like still, I mean, I had this double life. I still went and played football with my friends.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we'd go to the casino once in a while. I'd go to the movies. I would pick up my son from school and we'd do homework together. And like, I had all that normal, what you might consider normal.
Mm-hmm.
But on the side, there was always this other lifestyle that ran parallel. And there was always this big need to hurry up and get back to it when I wasn't doing it. And it got to the point over the years where the lines got really blurry for me, because this thing had a hold on me and it was always going to be a part of who I was. And by the time my wife and I met, this is flashing way forward to 2009. And ironically, her and I met on Match.com, go figure. But in a very healthy way. My sex addiction, my behavior had already really fucked up my life in a few ways. I almost went to freaking prison because of it.
Wow.
I had a 1.5 year long legal saga. I had a career as a school teacher. I was an English teacher. And I'd gotten to the point where I was talking online to students. And one of them accused me of sexual assault. Now, it was completely untrue, but there was enough evidence from
Conversation
stuff online where it was her word against mine. Long story short, that took over my life for about 1.5 years before I met my wife. And the amount of damage you would think that I endured from that situation, between, you know, the police coming to my house and seizing my computer. And I went on leave of absence from my teaching career for 1.5 years. I lived in a small town.
Oh no.
I was on the front page of the newspaper. Teacher accused of rape.
Oh my gosh.
You can't erase that shit. Yeah. News came to my house and knocked on the door and wanted to comment. Everyone knew I was publicly disgraced. Whether I did it or not didn't matter. The legal process played out. And ultimately, I pled no contest to a misdemeanor assault just to get rid of the thing. Like it was all bullshit, but it had played out for going on 2 years. And I was just at the point where, you know, had it gone all the way to like a trial, I probably would have been completely vindicated, because that's what all the evidence showed. And it was, but long story short, you would think that the damage that I endured from that would have been enough to like scare me straight. And it did for a while. And then before long, it was right back into it. So
were these almost always, little relationships that started with written stuff? I mean, started with the notes with the girl in Spanish class and then the online chats and so forth. Or was it like you're at the store, you're out in public, and was it always this kind of hidden beginning?
Bizarre as it might sound, it's the hidden beginning.
Mm.
And that didn't matter whether it was, because 99.9% of my behavior was with people that were of legal age. And yeah, I mean, maybe they were single, maybe they weren't, maybe I was, maybe they weren't, but there was always some air of danger that went with
some
it.
Taboo in there. Yeah.
Always.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of my behavior or a lot of these chit chats began with just like a quick instant message. And over time, like everything else, it evolves. Text messaging became much, much more prevalent in the years after that. iPhones, came out, where now you have a TV and a camera and any website you want to go to in your pocket at all times. so it became easier to engage in my behavior. And by the time my wife and I met in 2009, and as I've gone through the step work in my program and looking at the first step as part of this narrative, where you really have to, you don't write this in one day. Like it took me 3-4 months. My step one is over 60 typed pages.
Oh my word.
I mean, it's almost a book.
Mm-hmm.
And there's probably a lot of shit in there that I don't need to have in there, but I think it's all relevant.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really all that matters. I look back at the day that I met my wife. She never got a fair shot. Like, I was so far gone at that point and so immersed in my behavior, that it was always a presence in our life. Always. It was always in the background. And there were several times, both before we got married and during the course of our marriage, that she'd stumble upon stuff, and, you know, she would snoop. She'd go on my computer or whatever, or pick up my phone, whatever. She'd uncover something, and we had this big gotcha moment. And I'd sweet talk my way through it, and we'd move on. We've been to therapists, multiple times over the years. But none of it really helped. Like, I got to a point up until the day that I got sober in February of 2021. This had spilled over to, as I mentioned before, hundreds and hundreds, if not maybe thousands, of anonymous online relationships with women from social media, girls I knew at work, the girls that worked for me. I made an absolute mess of my workplace. Amazing that I never got fired, or I had a very high profile corporate position, which I took full advantage of, with new employees, especially. Again, same thing, just kind of that little air of taboo. We were all adults here, but they would start it, I would start it. It was a little bit of everything. But over the course of our marriage, hundreds and hundreds of those online texting, sexting, cyber sex, social media type, interactions. And then close to 30, 26 is the number, is the actual number of physical affairs that I've had during the course of my marriage.
Married. You mentioned earlier that you went in like 2013 to some meetings or whatever. What was that? Was this like, so did she know about the thing when you were a teacher?
She did. I told her that right when we got together,
and then
like on our second or third date.
And then 2 or 3 years later, you end up in a meeting because something was discovered, and it was like, okay, you need to take care of this, and you began.
So it was about 4 or 5 years later, well after we'd been married. I had been carrying on sexting with a girl at work. She actually, when I began, she worked for the company for a while, then she left. And the time she was gone from the company, her and I began talking, like texting each other and stuff. And then she ended up coming back to work for the company, and they put her on my team. So kind of a weird dynamic. I got a major promotion with the company I worked with, and hadn't come easy. I earned it. Major promotion into what probably was a $400,000 to $500,000 a year director's position. So major promotion. She had also applied for that job. Just based on the experience we had going into it. She was one of like 4 or 5 other candidates. She had no chance of getting that job. Just hadn't had enough experience. Mm-hmm. Plus she was a freaking wacko. So she got pissed that I got the job and she didn't. And that was all the excuse that she needed to go to HR and show them texts between her and I that had been going on while she was an employee.
Oh boy.
So I lost my promotion over it. I actually had the job for about a month, and then it all just kind of played out with HR. And I had to take a demotion at work, but there was no way to do that without telling my wife. There was no way to hide the fact that, I'm not going to make this much money. I'm not going to have this position. Like, my lying wasn't going to go that far. But I had to come clean on that. And that's what pushed me, or I should say inspired me back in 2013, to get into my first experience in SAA, 12-step program. So again, big city. It had a, at that point, this is going back 10 years. It was still kind of a newly recognized addiction, but, I found my way into those rooms, and that was my first experience, with Sex Addicts Anonymous.
Wow. I'm curious about the connection that you may see with, like, I talk about with some of my clients, the mother wound. There's often I just remember being in my undergraduate program and listening to, you remember Loveline, Dr. Drew and Adam Carolla? They would do a radio show, and the girl
100%.
And the girl would be like, some girl would call in and she would say, I just can't stop sleeping with everybody and whatever. And they would kind of joke and say, what's up with you and your dad? Like he was gone or he was abusive or whatever. And I think that holds true often with addicts, especially with this kind of thing where there may be some disconnect or some missing or toxic relationship with the mother, when in the case of men. And so this pursuit, this need for like feminine attention or feminine acceptance or whatever that may have been, just wonder what your take is on that in general for this thing. And then maybe for you specifically, just, there wasn't a lot of love there with mom. And so I've got or this incomplete relationship. So I'm going to try to, and this is all unconsciously, of course, but I need to go and like fill this void in me, where I didn't have that. You sound like you had a great relationship with your dad. She was more difficult.
For sure. There's a lot to unpack with that question, for sure. I will be the first one. I know for a fact I have identified where this began. And some would argue that's not an important detail in recovering from sex addiction. I think it is. I needed to figure out where the hell did this start? And I determined that pretty quickly. It was childhood trauma, fear of abandonment, all the shit we all deal with. Parents divorced, abusive mother, isolation, learning to lie and manipulate to stay out of trouble, to avoid a beating, basically. And then my first real sexual experience with someone, just having the carpet pulled completely from under me. Now, my son is 25 years old now, and I wouldn't go back and change a damn thing about how it happened, because it has resulted in, and has always been the case with him. I have a phenomenal son. Him and I have an amazing relationship. His mother and I get along just fine now. We haven't always. We are good co-parents together.
Oh, that's
so
great.
We're very fortunate that it's worked out, and he's happy, he's healthy, he's a college graduate. So I wouldn't go back and ask for a redo. And that includes all parts of it. I wouldn't go back and ask for a redo because it's the results of who he is today. I wouldn't want to change that. However, knowing where it began is part of, your first step in figuring out, your whole sexual history.
Mm-hmm.
That's all fine and good. I am the one accountable for my behavior. I made, over the years, a series of decisions. How I ended up making those, how I ended up in that position. Yeah, I can look and I can point the finger and I can look at, I was a victim when I was a kid and I got beat and my mom was a pain in the ass and she hooted and hawed. And my first girlfriend, she lied about being on birth control, and I can unpack all that. Ultimately, that put me in a position where I could have handled that a bunch of different ways. I am solely responsible for the choices that I made after that. So I struggle with some of the language in the 12 steps at in SAA, even though I understand why it's there. It's all the principles of any good 12-step program, which helps a lot of people. I'm a nitpicker. I look at the language. One of the things that they talk about is believing that a higher power can restore you to sanity. The higher power component for me, it's enough for me to accept that there is a higher power. There is some greater force, and has been for me for years at work, keeping me out of trouble. We'll get back to that in a second. But restoring you to sanity means I have to admit that I was out of my freaking mind. And I was 100%. But I feel like it lets me off the hook too easily. That I can say, oh, well, damn. Yeah, I had all these affairs and all these girls online, but I was out of my mind. To me, it removes some of the accountability, and I need that for myself. If I am to continue on my path of sobriety, I cannot just throw my hands in the air. And there are those in the program who will argue that's not what it says. It's open to interpretation. The way I read it is I'm not going to throw my hands up in the air and just say, well, I was insane. I was crazy. Not my fault. Like, that to me is complete crap. I made these choices. Yes, some really unfortunate shit happened when I was a kid, and maybe I'm a little fucked up from that. Sorry, pardon my language. Okay. But that got me into position A, where I could have chosen to do thousands of other things instead, which may or may not have been healthy. I don't know. But I made those choices. So the accountability, I need that for my own recovery. I cannot just sit back, and no one's saying you should. For me, I'm not just going to kick back and be like, well, I know for a fact that for someone to take the risks that I took and act the way that I did, there is no doubt in my mind. Yeah, I was out of my freaking mind. Nobody in their right mind would do that. Okay. But I'm not going to sit back and just be like, well, I'm turning it over to a higher power now so they can get me back to restore me to sanity. There's a lot to unpack with that. So for me, there is no doubt in my mind that there is some higher power or greater force, something greater than myself, which, ask anybody who's in a 12-step program, that's good enough.
That's good enough
to start with, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it talks about God as you understand God, and we all had different levels of spirituality. It's a spiritual-based program, not religious-based. It's spiritual. So there's a lot of surrender involved, obviously. It is amazing when I finished my first step, writing it all out, which is filled with specific circumstances of things I did wrong, times when I felt powerless, examples of here's how my life is unmanageable. Looking at that in its entirety when I was done, having gone through that process, it is amazing that I'm either A, not in jail, don't have an STD, don't have illegitimate children wandering around out there, that my wife hasn't left me, that I still get to live in the house that I live in, that I still have a successful career, all the things that I care about, my son, my dogs, everything, a social life, that I still have all those things, that my life has somehow, some way, through all that garbage, remained intact. There is no freaking way that I'm just lucky, that I'm just that lucky. There is something greater at work that has allowed me to keep my life together. And there's definitely a reason. And for the first time ever, about a year ago, I had one of many epiphanies. There is no doubt that I'm sitting here right now and I have a purpose every day when I wake up. I mean, I start every single day with this mental gratitude checklist, which I think you have to if you're really in a recovery program, you got to wake up and thank your lucky stars for everything you see around you, basically.
Yeah.
No matter what that looks like. And I am here, I believe, in this position so that I can finally be the best husband that I can possibly be, the best father that I can possibly be, the best whatever for other people, because they freaking deserve it. Like, my wife deserves a husband who is honest and faithful and checked into her at all times. My son deserves a dad who's fully present, who, even though we live apart, he lives on the East Coast, I live out here. He just deserves my undivided attention when he needs it. And I deserve the same from him. That's all stuff that people take for granted. And I robbed them of all of that. And I robbed myself of all of that because I was so immersed in this other side of my lifestyle. So the higher power component, I will hopefully get to a point where I can articulate and look at, okay, God, here's how I understand what God is. It is enough at this point in my recovery to acknowledge, number one, I'm extremely lucky, but I'm not so lucky that I can't acknowledge there's some greater entity, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
I mean, this might sound a little comical. I'm a big Star Wars fan, right? They all believe in the Force. Like, the Force is an energy field. It surrounds us, penetrates us, and binds the universe together, right? So for me, it's like, yeah, that's kind of how I look at it. Like, I can't move things with my hands and stuff, and but I look at it like that's the mojo, that's the ether that I know exists. So that and the fact there's so many people that I know in programs of recovery, or in the program that I'm in here, who are making it to meetings multiple times a week. They're showing up and their lives are freaking destroyed. Like, yes, they're in a program of recovery, which is for themselves and those they care about, spouses, children, coworkers, whatever, friends. They will hopefully at some point be the benefactors of the program itself, and because they're going to have a person with new behavior. But these are people that they've lost their jobs. They've done time. They're not allowed to see their children.
Wow.
Their wives or husbands are freaking long gone. Want nothing to do with them. So I can see, and I can listen to their stories, and I can see why it's very rare for someone to stay sober, because these their lives implode. And because of their behavior, and ironically, their behavior was ultimately caused because they were escaping from some other bad shit. So, okay, great. I'm in a program of recovery now, but my life's just exploded. So you've got a bunch of other bad stuff that's still happening. You've had to go find a new place to live or a job. You might go to jail. All these things that you might consider to be, this might send someone into a depression. Well, now they're going to need to escape from that somehow. So you can see why people, in my opinion, from my experience, from what I've observed, have a hard time.
High relapse percentage.
They have a hard time sticking with it. The reason I wake up every day and start with a gratitude list is because I got like Willy Wonka's golden ticket. Like, I didn't have to give up any of that. And there's a lot to unpack there also. But my wife quickly realized when I began to disclose the nature of my behavior almost 3 years ago, that I wasn't just some asshole with a bad habit. Like, I had a major problem, lifestyle problem, addiction. I needed help. And she made a choice early on where I think a lot of other spouses would have been like, I'm out. She made a choice to, for better or for worse, to stay with me and to help me. And I promise you, it has not been easy for either of us, but she has, she's had to accept a lot of things that a lot of people wouldn't even accept 10%. So I owe a lot of my sobriety to the fact that she was able to, or chose to see past, the darkness and really just she chose to believe in me when she had absolutely no reason to, because I was a lying, sneaky piece of shit our entire marriage.
I mean, 26 physical affairs and probably lots of other, online connections or whatever. I know her too, and I know she's just completely stellar. But I have to go back to your initial attitude about this. I mean, you were in a place, I remember talking to you later tonight. My buddy Taco Mike is coming in. He's a friend and more of a mentor than a friend. We don't hang out or talk a lot, but he is someone who's taught me a great deal about the recovery from self. Whatever the addiction, the real addiction is to self. Anyway, you reminded me of him, like one of the people that I know who's gone through. Anyway, so I just recognized there was some serious, authentic, just really genuine desire for you to get a hold of this thing and to come clean. And maybe that disclosure took some time. It seemed like that came in layers and in steps and whatever. And there were some ugly parts of that. There were some embarrassing parts of that, but you got through it, and all the way your attitude just seemed to be like that you were serious and you really wanted that. And I'm sure that your good wife picks up on that. And that's part of what allowed her. She has her own strengths and her own amazing qualities that have helped her survive this shit for 3 years or really for 10, because she knew about some of that from the beginning. And then the thing when you first started going to meetings, but so you came at this with some kind of broken-hearted, genuine, I tell guys all the time, you just need to look at the floor and nod your head. Yeah. Like yes, I did that and I hurt you and it wasn't your fault. And to just kind of never get tired of their hurt. You did this immensely painful thing to someone that you committed, all of you to, and it didn't go that way. Twice as many affairs as you had years together. I mean, that kind of thing would, like you said, I've almost never seen that. And that's why I wanted to have you share here, because I think it was because of your approach to it. You came into this thing really open-minded, open-hearted, pretty much an open book. It took a little time to disclose everything, but I think you have done it just right. And I think she's done her part just right. I can't even imagine it being a better scenario. So talk about the disclosure process and what made that difficult. I don't know if you want to throw in some of the hardest things to tell. And then how did she receive you, and how did she deal with her side of that for the wives who may be listening to this?
Sure. My man. So I don't know. I didn't know any other way to approach when I made the decision, which did not come. It wasn't like a spur of the moment decision. The night that I chose to begin to disclose and I was going to get help. I wasn't like an addict 1 minute and all of a sudden, okay, now I'm going to come clean. It took a day in between to kind of really muster up the courage to, am I really doing this? But I could see the pain on my wife's face. And I knew immediately that, and I told her, I was like, I'm going to tell you some really hard shit to hear. And if that means that this is the end of our marriage, that you need to know anyway. Because I knew I needed help. But the disclosure process for us was very ugly. Because I don't know if there is an absolutely right way to do this. My goal, foolish as it might have been, was to come clean, disclose what I thought she could handle to the point where she doesn't kick me out, and protect our marriage. That's how greedy I was. Even in my darkest moment where I was like, all right, well, I need to just completely give up on this and surrender. I still had a big enough ego, as I think any addict does, where, okay, yeah, I know I need help, but I don't need to tell her everything. And the excuse I used was to myself, as I rationalized, was broad strokes are good enough. That'll be plenty. The rest will just hurt too much to tell her. It'll hurt her too much. So here I was trying to control the narrative, right? And that played in the beginning. But in the months that followed, so I told her in the beginning, I would say about 50%, if I had to put a number to it. I told her a lot. And then some months later, through all these heart-to-heart discussions her and I were having every day, I told her some more. And then she began to dig in and ask more questions. And over the next year and a half, it was more and more, and therapy sessions and, marriage counseling meetings. It took me a year and a half to really tell her everything. So if she were sitting here, she would tell you that, yes, my sobriety began February 21st, 2021. But for her, that date doesn't mean nearly as much as it does to me, because that's how long it's been since I've acted out or engaged any of my inner circle behaviors. But for her, it's really only been about a year and a half since she really knew the full depth and breadth. So I'm guilty of what's called staggered disclosure. It's actually, and in hindsight, I'm sure for her, it was by far the most painful, I don't know, maybe the most painful way that I could have done it. Because if we break it into, let's say 3 or 4 chunks, 3 or 4 phases, right? Each phase was just ripping that wound open again. Not because I had done anything new. I hadn't acted out with somebody new or relapsed, but because I hadn't told her everything. And I think anybody who is the codependent, if you will, of somebody who is a betrayer, an abuser, they have to make peace, or they have to reconcile, right? The behavior itself is destructive, but the dishonesty that goes with it. And it's become very clear to me, and was early in my addiction. Yes, the behavior was extremely painful. The dishonesty, the lying, the sneaking, the covering up, the half-truths, if you will, that was so much more impactful for her. And it's taken us some time, and I'm happy to say that we're at a place now where, I've done full disclosure. There are no more rocks to turn over. There's no more grenades that are going to go off in the backpack. But we haven't been living that way for that long. Only about a year and a half, I would say, at the most. And that has been absolutely a 100% breakthrough for both of us, because now I feel like she can really now begin to heal. And if she chooses, and whatever that means in her own recovery journey, because I've been told numerous times just by my therapist to stay on my own side of the street and butt out. I get it. But for her, she has to know and have it validated often and reminded that the person she's married to now is not the person she was married to for the previous 13 years. Because I'm not having to measure or screen or deliberate or filter anything I say to her. Any questions she asks me, I don't care what it's about. It may not be about my addiction. It might be about, how was work today? That I can just, fearlessly be honest. And that is, for me, it took time to get me there because I've never lived that way. I've always, no matter who I was with growing up as a kid, when confronted with something uncomfortable or otherwise, I always had to really deliberate and who have I told what and how much of this can I really say? I had to freaking manipulate my answer. So the biggest thing for my wife is that she's reminded and receives validation, as often as possible, that she no longer has to be afraid of me. And there will always be, she'd be foolish if she ever let go of that completely. And she's not, she's very smart. And she can read my body language and my tone of voice. Like, I've had to learn how much of an impact those things have on her. Like when I roll my eyes at something, or if the tone of my voice is snarky, like that has an impact on her. So that's a big part. But the staggered disclosure, it's actually become, it's a very common topic in meetings.
Mm-hmm.
And I will probably never get the answer whether that was the right way to do it or not. It's not something I'll ever have to go through again. So that's, hey, great. But to put her through that amount of pain in phases like that over a 18-month period, even though she knew I was sober and even though she knew I was clean and going to meetings and, hey, recovering, and she was choosing to stay with me, the fact that I had to rip that wound open over and over again, I will live with that regret forever. However, my sponsor has, devil's advocate, a lot of experience in the program, has mentored a lot of people like myself. And staggered disclosure is very common because addicts have egos, and you don't just stop acting in a self-serving way overnight. You're always going to act in your own interests first. Or at least I did. So the opinion of my sponsor is that staggered disclosure, if my goal was to protect my marriage, that's the way it had to happen. And he doesn't know my wife at all and only knows me from meetings. But in his experience, he has conveyed to me numerous times, he's like, if you had told her everything in one day, your ass would have been gone, or she would have been gone. Divorced, fired, whole 9 yards. Like, because my wife and I we own a business together. Mm-hmm. So this is all in as it gets.
Right.
Like, if this don't work out, I lose my wife, I lose my job, my house, my dogs, everything. So, it's, my sponsor gave the analogy of overloading a circuit.
Mm.
He's like, if you pump too much electricity through a circuit, what happens to it?
Yeah.
So we're at this point in our recovery as a couple together. She has plenty of things on her end that she does solo, that for her own mental health, her own therapist, that she needs to maintain her sanity. And I have my program of recovery as well. We each have things that we're doing independently as well as things together. And trust me when I tell you, we still have days. They don't happen nearly as often as they used to. But there is days when she wakes up and she's just like, I'm just having a day. And she'll ask me a question about how I used to act. She'll ask me, she just needs to feel like she's loved. She just needs to feel protected and safe because the person that she was married to for all those years, not that there weren't good things about that person also. That's the double life. But those don't make up for the dishonesty and the unfaithfulness and everything else that came with it. I mean, it's a lot to unpack, like I was saying before.
Jay, man, this is a remarkable story. You've got all this history of dirtbaggery and just, deception, dishonesty, all this stuff that is most people don't make it out the way you have. You got almost 3 years. By the way, Jay and I have the same sobriety date. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's what this say 2/21/21. That's when I stopped drinking.
You know what?
Yeah.
You texted me that one day and I'd forgotten. You're right.
So, so you've survived things in a way that most people aren't able to do. You've gone into this with a good attitude. That you've made the decision to get yourself squared away, and you've done that in a big way. When you first came in tonight, you said that your relationship now is better than ever. Obviously, still, always things to work on. But if you could give just a few last thoughts for someone who's just coming into this notion that they may be an addict to whatever, that they're lying and concealing and covering up, and they're full of shame and they've got whatever going on, to that person and their loved ones, what would you say to someone who's where you were, in January of 2021 or before you really kind of came to fixing this stuff?
Happy to. Yeah. One of the first things I had to reconcile, and it came up very early in recovery. And ironically, it came up at my last meeting, which was a week ago. Somebody said to me, hey, you're almost 3 years in. You don't seem to be really struggling with this. There's a phrase we have called white knuckling, where if you're triggered or if you're itching to act out or whatever your predilection is, that you're like having a hard time staying sober. And fortunately, I don't have very many of those, if any of those moments. So he challenged me. He goes, well, I know he didn't point it at me, but I could know what he was getting at. He basically said, I've known a lot of guys in this program, and this guy's been in the program for freaking 25 years. I mean, he is a battle tested, grizzled veteran. And a lot of guys in this program that, maybe they weren't addicts. Maybe they just had a bad habit. And that really, first of all, it made me really think, and then it really bothered me. And I sat there, even at this meeting last Monday, for almost an hour, like just noodling on that aspect. Was I really an addict, or did I just have a bad habit? And I came to the conclusion very quickly, like biting your fingernails is a bad habit. Texting and driving is a bad habit. Somebody who has a bad habit doesn't have 26 extramarital affairs. Somebody who has a bad habit doesn't, when their son's in kindergarten and I could have picked them up at 2:00, but they have an aftercare program and it goes till 5:30. Somebody who has a bad habit doesn't take that 2.5 hour window and go home and spend every minute of it on AOL talking to girls I don't know, and gets to school to pick him up when it's dark and it's 15 minutes after they closed. So I think somebody going into this program for the first time, have that, wrestle with that for a minute. Because unfortunately, the way sex addiction is received by some, it does not pack the same weight, even though I think it should. It's just as debilitating. If somebody says they're an alcoholic or a drug addict, society, most people, there's an acceptance. Oh, they need help. Let's get them help. There's people who say, they get caught cheating on their wife or their husband or whatever, and they're like, oh, I'm a sex addict. And you get the eye roll like, oh, sure you are. Yeah, so is Tiger Woods. So there's a stigma that goes with it. I cannot sit here and I'm not going to give somebody advice on how to disclose or when to disclose to people they care about, their husbands, their wives, their children. I do not feel qualified to give a recommendation on that. I would say get to a meeting immediately. Get to the first possible meeting you can. And if that means you live in a place where there aren't meetings, go online. It does not. If you're a sex addict in this day and age, you know how to freaking use the internet. So you put your skills to good use. No matter where you live, you can find a meeting. It's either in the town you live in. Most towns have them every day, and they're held in recovery centers. They're held in churches. They're held all over the place. And if you can't get to one, find one online. Go to a Zoom meeting. The first 4 or 5 months I was in recovery here was tail end of COVID. Mm-hmm. So they only had one in-person meeting per week available. The rest were all Zoom meetings. So go to a Zoom meeting. They're run the same way as an in-person meeting. There's a more profound impact, in my opinion, of going to an in-person meeting. Different, you can read people's body language. The stories are more profound if you're hearing them face to face. And there's a higher level of accountability if you have to, get up and get dressed and get your ass in a car and drive to a meeting than there is just, going into your home office and having the hockey game on at the same time. Right. So, those are the first two things. There are those who will tell you that to make a recovery program work, you better find your spirituality real fast. And that's a big concept, and it means something different to everybody else. For me, I had to acknowledge, I was no longer allowed to have the car keys. Right. Mm-hmm. All right, dude, you've wrecked you've wrecked the thing enough times. Like, give me the keys. I should not be driving. So I had to, there's a lot of surrender that goes into it. Because the ego of somebody who really is an addict typically will say, well, I can fix this. I chose to do it. I can choose to stop doing it. In my experience, you will never figure it out for yourself. If you could have figured it out for yourself, it would have already happened. You're people who are really, from what based on what I've seen and stories that I've heard and just experiences and in my own, there is something broken about the choices that you've been making. And there's no right and there's no wrong. There's healthy and unhealthy. And if you really are in that position where you need a program of recovery, it's out there for you, but you've been making a lot of unhealthy choices. So the path to making healthy choices is not one you can figure out. You won't find it on your own. You have to call in some other resources. That's, licensed therapists like yourself, counselors, people who, and you have to dig. It took me going to 4 or 5 different therapists before I found one that had the first damn clue what I was talking about. Mm-hmm. I went to one for over 6 months and I realized this lady is really not helping me because I'm teaching her more than she's teaching me. The therapist I have now, I had to get as a referral from somebody who's already in the program, and she kicks my ass. This lady gives me homework. Yeah. So it's a hard path, but you have to do it if you really want to get clean. When and if you share whatever level of behavior you're into with your husband or your wife or your family members, I do not feel qualified to make any kind of recommendation on that. And I'm not even sure the way I did it was the right way, because I caught it. Yeah, fortunately my marriage is still intact. We're in a good place, but what I put my wife through, I'll be making up for that the rest of my life. On top of all the shit that I was into, the way that it was handled, that caused a lot of pain and probably did more damage than the behavior itself did. We've been able to negotiate our way and move past that. But that first year and a half, I felt like I was still digging, even though I was clean. I was still manipulating the narrative. And it wasn't until I stopped doing that and really had to push everything into the middle that, I think we really, as a couple, began to recover.
Jay, I really appreciate you being here today, man. This is just a profoundly inspiring story. So many people go through this exact thing. I think if all of our, the thing about like a sex addiction or something like this, it can be, if you're an alcoholic, it's going to probably be known. Somebody's going to see it. Somebody's going to know. This stuff is all private behavior anyway. And although you're always at risk if it's online or you're talking to another human, it can always be discovered, but I think it can fly under the radar a lot better than if you're using heroin. Fucking people are going to know that.
Yeah,
it's going to be seen.
You'd think.
This one, you're just a handsome guy out there and a executive in your company and doing the, and you've got the new hires and you're doing these little things, and it's just kind of, there's some spark to it. There's some, you've got this player kind of thing, and it's almost celebrated in pop culture and whatever, that you can get lots of women. You have all these things. And I know that some of those stories were not glamorous and sexy. Some of those things were ugly and, difficult to talk about, but you've done so many good things. I guess I did not know that it was a year and a half until you really had everything out on the table, but I knew that you were headed that direction when I met you. And I know that I think one of the things we talked about is, hey, most people aren't sharing all of this, even in their confession, so to speak. They're not really confessing everything, and that there may be more, and that maybe she should be prepared for that. But you've done the work, man. You've showed up, you've done the things, you've endured the conversations and the tears and the anger and all the hurt that you put her through. That's the part that I really respect, is that you've kind of allowed yourself to get banged around and kind of beat up through the process of recovery and healing, even in your relationship. It's just remarkable, man. I appreciate it. You guys, we're talking about this because there is a high likelihood that if you're listening to this show, if you're listening to my voice right now, and you've listened to 90 minutes of this and, 8 episodes that we've done now on this topic, there's a likelihood that you've got some things to work out, even if it's not an addiction. Jay talked about the fact that his wife wasn't so much hurt by the things that he did, but by the deception and the mental games and the concealment of all of that. And from my perspective as a mental health provider, I think also that's the most destructive part of it, is the shame and the covering. Because really this is driven by the feeling of isolation. And the more we have, the more secrets we have, we're only as sick as our secrets. That's what they say in AA. I don't know if that's true in other forms of addiction. But so to talk to someone, Jay recommends get to a meeting as soon as possible. You got to include other people. Listen, your judgment and decision-making is not the best when you've been living this way for, in his case, 25 years. And people will show up who can guide you through that process. When you're ready for it, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And you have really, I'm just impressed with you. I'm glad that you've been able to maintain all the things that you have, your wife, your home, your business, your dogs, your relationship with your son. Like, a lot of things just really seem to be like, and that may be the price that you have to pay for not losing that, is doing stuff like this, coming from clear across the other side of town. Plenty of things going on. It's NFL Sunday. He reminded me when we came in, like, why are we doing this on Sundays? But to make the sacrifice to go to meetings, to still, because I'm sure you're inspiring other people there, to do things like this. And even though this is anonymous, I mean, look, 300-400 people will probably listen to this. And before it's over, who knows how much this will be heard. But my guess is that you're going to continue talking about this, and maybe, I don't know if you're already doing this, but helping other people along the process. But I love what you're doing, Jay. Appreciate your time and your wisdom. The things that you brought here, I just could tell from the first day that I met you that you were going to be okay. I don't know what I saw, but it's shown to be true that you're going to find your way through it. Also, credit to your good wife, who I hope will maybe listen to this. Maybe you can't share this with a ton of people because then they're going to know all your dirt. But I hope that she recognizes that she has really earned some whatever peace that may come to her. She's earned that too through the hardship of, working that forgiveness and whatever else. And I love the love that you guys have for each other. It's really remarkable. You guys, until next time, no excuses. Alpha up. Dude.
Good stuff, brother. Thank you.
You ever do a podcast before?
No, it was my first one ever.
Well, you killed it. Holy shit.
If you're a man that controls his own destiny, a man that is always in the pursuit of being better, you are in the right place. You are responsible. You are strong. You are a leader. You are a force for good. Gentlemen, you are the Alpha, and this is the Alpha Quorum.